I learned a new sound. A more horrible sound than description can picture. It was the thud of speeding, living bodies on a stone sidewalk. Thud dead. Thud dead. Thud dead.
On March 25th, 1911, fire broke out on the 8th floor of New York City's Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Within minutes, the top 3 floors were ablaze. Workers on the 8th and 10th floors narrowly escaped.
In between was the 9th floor. This was the main sewing plant of the Triangle Factory. About 250 workers, teenagers and people in their early 20s were just finishing work. 4:45, the quitting bell rang, and they saw the flames outside their window. There was no warning before that. There was panic. Some of the workers went to the fire escape in the back of the building. It tore away from the rear wall of the building and dumped about 24 workers to their death in the air shaft. There were 2 doors out of the factory, and one of them was locked. For the last 100 or so workers, the only choice was to die in the flames or to jump out the windows. Now, March 25th, 1911 was a Saturday. Thousands of people were out enjoying the day, and they heard the commotion. They saw the smoke rising over the building, and they ran to see what was happening. So literally thousands of people watched helplessly as the workers above them made this terrible decision. They watched as 54 workers jumped or fell to their deaths from the windows of the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. This was the worst workplace disaster in New York City before September 11th, 2001. 146 workers were killed, 123 of them women and girls. 2 of the victims were just 14 years old.
Incensed by the tragedy, the public demanded reforms. Charlie Murphy, the shrewd political boss of Tammany Hall, saw the fire and its aftermath as an opportunity to attract immigrant and progressive voters to the Democratic Party.
Murphy gave a green light to the 2 young men that were running the state legislature for him at the time, a guy named Alfred E. Smith and a guy named Robert F. Wagner. And Smith and Wagner formed the most important, most powerful legislative investigating commission in New York history.
The Triangle Fire also turned out to be the defining moment in the life of Frances Perkins.
She was one of those thousands of people out enjoying the day on March 25th in Washington Square and saw with her own eyes as the Triangle workers burned or fell to their deaths. It was a profoundly moving experience to her. She went to work with Smith and Wagner on the Factory Investigating Commission. They passed a whole raft of fire safety laws, but then they went beyond that to get into things like shorter work weeks and workers' compensation for injured workers, limits on child labor.
The reform laws proved very popular in New York and certainly benefited Tammany Hall, but they also inspired others.
What's important to understand about their work is that it then was picked up and emulated in other states, so it kept being advanced and advanced.
At the state level, progressives were especially active in the Midwest, in the South, sometimes in the Northeast. Progressives used state government to make pioneering changes, especially in the conditions of workers, conditions of labor. They made pioneering changes in tax laws, efforts to control the behavior of corporations and the wealthy. Some progressives thought of state governments as kind of laboratories almost for change. And yet, one of the frustrations for progressives was the fact that the thing they were most worried about, industrial capitalism, was a national phenomenon. States couldn't very effectively get at the behavior of these nationwide corporations. To do that progressives needed the power of the federal government. So on the one hand, state government is much of the story of progressivism and the progressive movement. Many of the accomplishments are there, but it's also, and it had to be, a national story because industrial capitalism was a national phenomenon.